Okay, thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Tuesday Power Hour. Um, I am happy, I'm excited, and I have a subject today that I don't know that I've ever spoken on before, but it's something that I've been studying. I'm reading some books on it. But yeah, just want to come on here live and let you know that I'm still studying. I'm still searching. I still like have people pouring into me as well. And so I'm just giving back a lot of what I've been given. So thanks for being here. And, um, if I asked you, what is a leadership quality? You probably would say things like integrity and leading by example, and there's a lot of qualities that leaders have. And so I'd probably get as many answers as there are people in the audience. And so the question is, um, that I was asking is, what are some qualities of a leader? And I've discovered that there is a quality that we typically think it's a negative. We think that this word that I'm thinking about is a not a good place to be. But I want to shift your mindset set a little bit and help you to understand that vulnerability is not always a bad thing. In fact, it's usually, when we think of business and leadership and engaging with people, vulnerability is a good thing. But when we hear it, we say, we kind of put it onto the bad side of business and a business life. And so, we've all heard of things like your business is vulnerable and you need to run a tight ship, or when you're vulnerable, you're open for attacks. And so I want to challenge your mindset around the word vulnerable. So sometimes when I try to understand a word, I look at the opposite of that word. Okay. And so the opposite of vulnerable or vulnerability is immune, resistant, impervious, means it can't get in, guarded. And so as a leader, you don't want to be immune and resistant and impervious and guarded. You want to be open. You want to be authentic, is another word that kind of describes what we're going to be talking about here. And so we're going to be talking about vulnerability in the workplace, and how to become more vulnerable, and what are the benefits of being vulnerable as a business leader or even as a coworker. There's tremendous benefits at being vulnerable. So if you are resistant, if you're immune to everything, that means you're guarded. That means you have a wall. That means you have a blockade in front of you, and people can't penetrate it. Ideas can't penetrate it. And so we're going to look at this whole thing about vulnerability. And I hope that at the end of this talk, you're going to make a decision to be just a little bit more vulnerable. So there's some myths about being vulnerable. Most of the time, we look at being vulnerable as you're weak, you're exposed, you're out for the taking, you're sticking out like a sore thumb. Um, but think about this. Think about vulnerability. If you feel vulnerable, if you feel like something could happen, if you do something, something could happen. That means that if you go ahead and do it, that means you're brave. That means that you have strength. And so I believe strong leaders are vulnerable, and they practice vulnerability. Otherwise, they would protect themselves from everything that could hurt them. I think entrepreneurs are very vulnerable. They have an idea and they risk their whole life on it. They risk their life savings and everything. They risk for the sake of achievement. And if you're guarded, if you're not vulnerable, you're not going to risk anything. And so having vulnerability in your life is a sign of a strong leader, not a weak person. And so I want to give you some parameters of vulnerability as well. So I do think that you can be over vulnerable. I believe you can be too vulnerable. I believe that it's important that we understand that there's boundaries, and you can share too much. I once heard a preacher that was preaching, and he preached so much about his personal life, and he was very vulnerable. He was very open with who he was, but it was almost too much because it made people feel uncomfortable that the person preaching was struggling in certain areas. And so there's a time and place. So vulnerability minus boundaries is not vulnerability. You have to have some boundaries. There's some things that you need to be a little bit more wise to when you're practicing vulnerability. Make sure that when you are vulnerable, that the people that can actually help you are in front of you. Don't be vulnerable just for the sake of being vulnerable. Be vulnerable for the sake of finding help and getting encouragement and actually opening your input of other people in your lives. And so I think that's really important, that we understand that vulnerability minus boundaries is not vulnerability. It's stupidity. Okay, that's what it is. So I want you to take a moment and think of the traits of an effective leader. Think about an effective leader in your life, what you think is a very good leader. Maybe you picture some kind of assertive and demanding, or a perfectionist who likes things a certain way. Perhaps you envision someone bossy and stern who values your performance but doesn't care about you as an individual. Maybe the supervisor or the leader you had in mind is polite yet guarded. Sure, there's some experienced leaders can have these traits, but being assertive doesn't guarantee success in the workplace. In fact, it may actually drive away employees. If you want a dedicated, productive workers, consider practicing vulnerable leadership at your company. Okay, so what is the definition of leadership vulnerability or vulnerable leadership in your business? I think it's I'll just read here what it says. You may already know the standard definition of vulnerability, but what does it mean in the workplace? Workplace vulnerability doesn't mean being weak or wimpy. I want us to double click on that. It does not mean that you are weak and wimpy, nor does it involve acting like a pushover. Some of the strongest leaders that I know are super vulnerable. So being vulnerable at work shows employees you are candid, you're compassionate, and I love this word, authentic. And I'm gonna park on this word and teach. There was a study done on human emotions, love, hate, joy, and they did a study there was a chamber, a frequency-free chamber, where there was no way frequencies from the outside could come inside of this chamber. And they put a person inside the chamber and measured the frequencies inside the chamber. So it was coming out of that person. Maybe you don't know, but you create frequencies when you think about love, or when you practice love, when you practice joy, hate. All of your emotions create frequencies. And when they told somebody to think about the person that they love the most, and they measured the frequencies that came out of that capsule, and then they talked about it. Think about a time where you were emotionally stressed and angry, and then they captured those frequencies, and then they told the person to think about authenticity. Think about a time when you remember somebody that you know was the most authentic, meaning they are themselves. They're not trying to be somebody else. They're not putting on something that they don't have. They're authentic. And the frequency that produced the most volume, the most amount of frequencies by a long shot was authenticity. Much stronger than hate, much stronger than love, much stronger than joy. Being authentic creates a frequency that other people can actually sense and feel. Like your brain doesn't recognize, oh, that's the frequency of authenticity, but you will say, man, I just like being around that person. He or she is just super down to earth. We've all heard those terms. So authenticity is a byproduct of vulnerability. You can't have authenticity without being vulnerable. And you can't have vulnerability without producing authenticity. And so vulnerability is the act of facing things that you don't know, when things could potentially go wrong, when things could potentially turn around, slap you in the face, or embarrass you, or show that you maybe didn't have it together, but you're trying it and you're facing it. That is a form of authenticity. So when it comes to workplace leadership and management, vulnerability is a strength. As a vulnerable leader, you can connect with employees on a personal level and share honest insights about business-related uncertainties. How many of you can honestly raise your hand or say yes to this next question? Is your business perfect? Is your business not facing some kind of uncertainty? There's not a hand that could go up if you're totally honest. You cannot say that your business faces some kind of, or it does not face some kind of uncertainty. And so, being authentic and vulnerable helps you connect, and it allows other people to start inputting into that vulnerable space. I remember one time that I was really battling with the idea of having to tell somebody something that I knew I needed to tell, and I was scared that that person would like run away and leave because of an uncertainty that I was facing. This was way back when I was about 28 years old. And I struggled with it, and I kept saying, well, I know I'm not going to bring it up. It's like that person, builds trust. Okay, now my camera's back, so yeah, we're back good. Vulnerability builds trust, and so the story that I was about to tell you was I finally, came to the place to where I found the strength to become vulnerable and let this person know that I was struggling in a certain part of my business and life, frankly. And here's the deal. I was expecting that person to move away from me, to separate themselves from me, but they actually came closer to me. And I remember that was my first real experience with what vulnerability produces. And it allowed them to start getting creative with me. And it was basically me saying, hey, I don't know the answer. I don't know what to do. I'm actually scared about the future. And this person actually came towards me instead of running away from me. And I remember feeling like, wow, I have so much support here. I'm not on this thing alone. And I remember, kind of making a note about that, as I was young. And this is before I was actually speaking and training and doing what I'm doing. And I said, any chance that I can, I'm going to be honest and vulnerable, because it allows people, it puts them in a position to want to actually help. Okay. So I imagine we've all probably worked for an individual that knew it all, that had all the answers, or at least he or she, projected that feeling that yeah, if you have a problem, come to me and I'll fix it because I'm the owner, I'm the leader. And they never share anything that they struggle with, but yet you actually see that they struggle. You actually know that they're struggling, but they're acting like a strong man, and that does not build trust. Okay, so authenticity builds trust. Vulnerability builds trust. Vulnerable leadership encourages transparency and respect in the workplace. Some of the best examples of vulnerability involve leaders who connect with workers on a personal level. These leaders understand their teams, and they aren't just learning about employees' lives to be polite. They truly care about their employees and want them to succeed. So I'm gonna give you 7 different benefits of practicing vulnerability in the workplace. So number 1, it will improve productivity. And the reason for that, it gets their creative, like if you have an issue in your business, and instead of being high and mighty and saying, okay, here's what we're going to do to fix it, why not just walk out to the floor and say, guys, here's the challenge that we have. What are your thoughts? And you start engaging their minds and their ideas. And we recently just went through this in a company that I was with just last week. We, there was a core group of leadership, and we were trying to come up with ideas to grow the company and out of the box marketing ideas. And we had about 6 people around the conference room. And so we started popping off ideas. Well, they had about a total of 12 other people down on the floor, employees. And I just, after all of the efforts and the ideas were exposed around the table, I said, now, how many employees do you have down the room? And they said about 12 more. And I said, imagine if we had their input. Imagine, we came up with like 9 or 10 really good ideas just in 10 minutes time. But what would happen if we brought everybody in and said, here's the challenge, let's go. And so you're going to improve productivity when you become vulnerable. Number 2, it's going to build an excellent teamwork culture. Workers who dislike leaders or other team members generally aren't thrilled about collaborating on projects. So if you want people to like you, be authentic, be vulnerable, share some of your struggles, share some of your challenges in the business. And I'm not talking about your personal life. You can do that if you want to, but in the business life, be willing to say, I need your help. I need your input. And when you do that, people run towards you instead of away from you. People say, well, I got you, boss. We'll do whatever it takes. At the bare minimum, they're going to show a willingness to partner in the challenge. They may not have all the answers, but they're going to say, whatever you decide, we're going to stick with you. We're going to, because now you're including them not only in the good, but also in the difficult. Number 3, it reduces turnover rates. I can pretty much assure you that a toxic workplace is not a vulnerable workplace. There's not vulnerability being practiced in a healthy way if you have a toxic workplace. So a toxic workplace typically doesn't attract hardworking, ambitious employees. And when you have vulnerable leadership, it reduces employee turnover by treating employees well and showing that you care about them. And, when was the last time that you became vulnerable in front of an employee and said, when they might share something with you that they're struggling with, when was the last time that you said, yeah, you know what, that's hard. Let me tell you what I went through around the same thing. Because let's face it, whether you're a leader or whether you're an employee, we all pretty much tend to go through some of the very same things. It's like, we all have different challenges, but we all can face times of disappointment or rejection. You might be talking with a salesperson that says, man, I thought I had this client, but boy, he rejected me hard. Well, share about the time that you got rejected. Let them know that they're not the only ones that have struggled with that. And so enter into it with your employees. So it's really important that we understand that. I think number 4 is, it speaks for itself. It will increase your sales. And so when you're authentic and vulnerable, and you can identify with the purchaser or the buyer's emotions, and you can, if they say, hey, I'm buying this product because this and this happened and I need to protect myself, in a certain area, I'm just, making up stuff here. But when the salesperson can identify with the emotion and become vulnerable and say, I too went through something similar, it builds trust, and it causes increase of sales when you're in sales. So, so there were four of those benefits, and later on I'm going to give you seven different ways to practice it. So those are the 4 benefits: improve productivity, excellent teamwork, reduce turnover rates, and increase your sales. So how to practice vulnerable leadership. As you focus on incorporating more examples of vulnerability into each workday, let leadership values guide your choice. For example, respect, integrity, authenticity are common core values that companies have. You may also feel it's important to exhibit courage in the workplace. So I want to touch on the thing about courage and vulnerability. We talked a little bit about it earlier, but it takes courage to be vulnerable. It's easy to hide. It's easy to avoid being vulnerable. Sometimes it's just a matter of just not saying anything and appearing like you have all the answers. But it takes courage to come out and say what is challenging you. It takes courage to come out and say, this is what our business is struggling with. It takes courage to come out and be honest with your staff, with your spouse, with your leaders. It takes courage, but I can promise you, when you do take that step of courage and raise your hand and say, this is what I'm struggling with in my business, this is what our business struggles right now, that there are people that when you share that, people will actually come to you in a supportive way, and they will have much more empathy and input that you can actually use. And so it's also empathy is another word that comes together when you have vulnerability. When you become vulnerable, there's no way to have vulnerability and without empathy. There's no way to actually love without becoming somewhat vulnerable. So I want you to think about that. So when you love somebody, you could very easily be rejected with that love. And so when you are vulnerable, you can actually demonstrate love unconditionally. And let's see, that other word that I was talking about, courage. Courage. It takes courage to be vulnerable. Being vulnerable and honest at work is a great way to demonstrate bravery. It takes courage to be yourself and connect with others. In fact, Brene Brown, who I'm reading right now, she has a book out about the power of vulnerability, believes courage and vulnerability are synonymous. Weak people aren't vulnerable. Weak people aren't vulnerable. Weak people are guarded. That's why they're guarding themselves, because they're weak. They don't want to be exposed. They can't handle that exposure. Strong people are vulnerable. Strong people say, yeah, you know what? It takes courage to be vulnerable. I'm going to tear down the walls and expose my limitations. I'm going to expose what I struggle with. I'm going to expose what my business needs. And here it goes. It takes courage. So it's a way to demonstrate bravery. Behaving in a vulnerable manner also demonstrates authenticity and integrity. There are no pretenses. You aren't masking your true intentions. Employees know that they can trust your word, and as a result, they may feel better about working at your company. If you want to increase your employee engagement, increase your vulnerability, increase your authenticity. So here's some examples of being vulnerable in the workplace. Number one, there's 7 of them. Apologize when you're wrong. It's very simple. Apologize when you're wrong. You know, I used to, when I was leading one of my companies, we had 35 employees, I would actually, I don't know if I'd say look forward to, but I would actually not hide from the opportunity to say, hey, gals, guys, I'm wrong. I thought I had it together, but here's the deal. I didn't, and I need your help. I would welcome that, because I wanted my employees to have input. I wanted them to actually have input into my business. So it's powerful when you apologize when you're wrong, when you admit that you're wrong. Number 2, share new ideas or different ideas. Share new or different ideas. It's easy to fall into a rut at work, especially if you or your employees hate change. So this is talking about if you always do the same thing, you're never going to be vulnerable, because it's kind of like a comfort zone. This is how we do it, and we always did it this way, and we're not changing, because we don't know what's on the other side of the big bad world on either side of it. And so sometimes you discover that being vulnerable opens up all kinds of new possibilities. When you're open to something that you don't know, and you maybe have outside help coming in to help you to see something bigger, it all of a sudden a whole new world opens up to you. So don't necessarily always do the thing that you've always do, because you'll always get what you always got. And so sometimes you have to share new and different ideas. Number 3, discuss sensitive matters. Discuss sensitive matters. So sometimes it's okay to say, guys, I want to talk to you about something, but this is a sensitive subject. And I understand that some people here are going to be hurt, left out, feel vulnerable, but I too am feeling vulnerable right now. But it's something that we need to discuss, because it can affect all of us. So let's jump in. And so that's a way of a leader. Like, there's some things that I don't want to have to talk about when I go into a company and coach them. There are things that I would much rather say, you know what, I'm just going to let them figure that out by themselves. But if I do that, do I truly love my client? Do I truly love my kids when I say, yeah, I need to talk to them about something, but I don't want to because they might not think I'm cool. So I'm just going to turn a blind eye to it and let them figure it out. That's not love. Love is vulnerability. And you better love your employees. As leaders, you better love the people that follow you. And you better be willing to talk about some sensitive issues that affect everyone because you love them and you want them to overcome it. So don't shy away from sensitive matters. Employees become invested when given the opportunity. That's right by Soraya. So number 4, set and respect boundaries. I'm just reading some of the comments on the side here. Life happens in every capacity. And Wayne Troyer says, hey, Dave, interesting topic. Soraya says, employees become invested when given the opportunity. And that is so true. Number 4, set and respect boundaries. What I said earlier, vulnerability without boundaries is not vulnerability. It's stupid. Okay. So basically, to practice vulnerability, you got to make sure that there's boundaries, and you can't just have you don't want to verbally throw up on people and share all of your issues and become super vulnerable, like way too vulnerable. It's all about timing. I feel like. So make sure you also respect the boundaries of other people as well. Number 5, don't expect perfection. Even the best employees can make mistakes at work. Even the leaders can make mistakes at work. So an employee should never fear that a minor mistake will cost them their job. Here's what I say. I love mistakes. I want you as business leaders and business owners to get to the point where you can say, I honestly love mistakes, but only if they happen once. Mistakes are seminars. When you make a mistake, learn from it. Figure out how not to do it again, but learn from it and move past it and embrace the idea of mistakes. Sometimes we're so micromanaged, we're so not vulnerable that we don't even allow people to learn something by making a mistake. Embrace the mistakes. Obviously, don't go out there and try to make a mistake, but when you do, talk about, hey, well, fantastic. What did you learn? How can we avoid this? What can we apply that to other areas and not repeat the same mistake? So that's very key. Number 6, get to know your employees. Don't pry into your workers' personal lives to the point where they feel uncomfortable. Make it a goal to learn a bit about everyone in your company. If you notice an employee has a photo on their desk, offer a genuine compliment, such as, I'm impressed that you managed to get the 3 kids to look at the camera all at once. Okay, so that's just some examples of becoming vulnerable and showing your humanity, not your leadership, your strong part, but also show them that you care about their personal lives as well. So get to know them on a personal level. So, and number 7, call out inappropriate behavior. Just yesterday, I was talking to somebody that for about 3 weeks, he kept telling me, yeah, I need to fire this guy. I need to let this guy go. And finally I said, so when are you going to do it? And he said, I'll get around to it sometime. And I said, nope, you're going to do it is exactly after we get off the call. You're going to do it because, calling out inappropriate behavior is vulnerable because you might come across as, to the other employees, you might come across as a dictator or somebody that can't appreciate mistakes. But it's important that a leader calls out inappropriate behavior and takes action quickly. And that becomes very vulnerable. And I asked him, why haven't you done it? Why haven't you done it? He said, because I hate being exposed like that. I hate doing that kind of disciplinary action. I want people to like me. And so I was helping him to learn how to become vulnerable by facing the hard thing, by doing the hard thing because he knew it should be done. So call out inappropriate behavior, and it goes all the way down to inappropriate jokes. Instead of laughing, say, hey, guys, let's dial it back in. That's not really appropriate. Let's be professional here. At the risk of sounding like a prude, at the risk of sounding self-righteousness, we don't do that sometimes because we fear that vulnerability. But a good leader faces vulnerability and says, here's a moment for us to become better, and I'm willing to become vulnerable so we can become better. So I want to give you some other ways that I found, some ways to practice vulnerability at work. So simply ask for help. Asking for help instead of telling others what to do can increase trust and cooperation. I remember employees would come into my office all the time and say, hey, something broke. What do you want me to do? And I used to tell them, because I was the boss, I was the leader. And you could see that they would kind of turn around they weren't happy. They weren't it was almost like they thought they might have had a better way to do it. So I started changing my approach. And when somebody would come into my office and ask me what to do, I'd say, wow, that sounds really difficult. What do you suppose we should do? And they would actually start sharing with me and say, well, if it was up to me, this is what I would do. And I said, wow, that sounds like a great idea. Why don't you do that and let me know how it goes? And so I started realizing that it doesn't really help my employees when I have all the answers. When I empower them to make decisions that could potentially be a bad decision or a good decision, that's vulnerable for me. That puts my company at some form of risk, but I'm empowering my people, and I'm letting them know that I trust them. So ask for help is key. Be self-aware. Self-awareness helps leaders recognize their strengths and weaknesses, which can help them make better decisions. Create connections. We talked about that. Don't just be a director, but also be a relationship guy and become vulnerable in relationships. Get involved with your people on a personal level. Define vulnerability for yourself. Being vulnerable with yourself can help you find your authentic self and process your feelings. And I'm just going to go through this list, and I want to get through some quotes here. Practice self-compassion. These are things that we're not really used to talking about, but I want to just challenge you. Practice self-compassion. What do you tell yourself when you make a mistake? What do you say when you hit your thumb with a hammer? Are you hard on yourself, or do you practice self-compassion? Because if you practice self-compassion, it then will allow you to have compassion for other people. So it can be challenging. So it's important to practice self-compassion so that you can have more compassion for others. Normalize vulnerability. Research shows that practicing small acts of vulnerability can reduce anxiety. Okay. So I remember, in the middle of COVID, everybody was fearful. Like at the beginning, people really were freaking out. People were really like, what's going to happen? And it helped when I, as a leader, started saying, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm sure we'll be okay. I'm sure we're going to get through this together. And that was an act of vulnerability on my part to say, I don't know what's going to happen, because they asked me what's going to happen. Meaning they thought that I would know what's going to happen. But when I said, I don't know what's going to happen, I'm worried too, but we're going to do this together. It actually reduced anxiety when I said, but we're going to do this together. We're going to be together on this. And so normalize vulnerability. The next one is model vulnerability. Leaders should model vulnerability, especially if they have a lot of people watching them. It's really good to do that. Give people a reward vulnerability is the next one. Create a culture that rewards acts of vulnerability. So what would happen if your company starts rewarding people when they see small acts of vulnerability and authenticity and humility? I think is all part of this. So here's a quote, and we're going to end this with a bunch of quotes and a few other thoughts then. And then I want to open it up for questions. So if you have questions, get ready to type them in, or go ahead and type them in right now, and I'll get to them at the end. And if you're on the phone line, manage to unmute yourself, and then we'll have some questions here. Here's a quote. It's actually a paragraph. The ability to express and expose in words and behavior who we really are and what we genuinely think and feel is often mistaken for weakness or fragility, but it is actually the root of authentic leadership and meaningful connection. Vulnerability can help us build trust, foster creativity, and engage with our colleagues in a deeper way. So let's see, there are several others here that I want to get through if I can find it. No vulnerability, no creativity. So without vulnerability, it's impossible to have creativity. Think about that. If you're creating something, that means it has not been created before, and it could or it could not work. So if you want to be creative, guess what? You're being vulnerable when you're creative. No tolerance for failure, no innovation. It is that simple. If you're not willing to fail, you cannot innovate. If you're not willing to build a vulnerable culture, you cannot create. When I was reading the book called Elon Musk, he started building rockets, and he told his team, I feel like 100% sure that our first several rockets won't make it to orbit. And they cost millions of dollars. But he said, our cause is greater than the loss of a few $1 million. We have to keep going. We have to be vulnerable in order to create something that is going to be successful. And I think they had like 5 or 6 rockets that blew up before they ever got to space. And every time he said something like, congratulations, this is a great day because we learned what doesn't work. And we now can go a little bit farther. And each rocket went a little bit closer. And you have to be vulnerable if you want to create. I believe that you have to walk through vulnerability to get to courage. I like that. The benefits of vulnerability in the workplace start with leaders who are willing to be open even when it's uncomfortable. For example, leaders who don't try to pretend like they are perfect and know all the answers all the time tend to create a sense of psychological safety for their team. Strong leaders are confident enough to let others see them without all the answers, which in turn empowers employees to find their own answers and show vulnerability themselves. Next time you have a challenge in your business, try your best to not come up with an answer. You personally. And admit to your team, I don't have an answer for this. I need your help. And you're going to start seeing creativity. You're going to start seeing people that came out of the woodworks to actually help you and partner with on that challenge. The key benefit of embracing vulnerability at work include building trust, creating an open environment for innovation, encouraging collaboration and teamwork, and nurturing psychological safety. All these things can help create a better work culture, as well as helping to boost morale and performance in the workplace. Vulnerability normalizes emotions in the workplace. When leaders display authentic emotions, they instantly become more relatable to their employees, which breeds trust and connection. Two ingredients of collaborative, high-performing teams is collaborative. I'm sorry, let me reread this. They instantly become more relatable to the reports, which breeds trust and connection. Those are the two ingredients of collaborative, high-performing team: trust and connection. When employees see their leaders showing emotions such as sadness, empathy, and compassion, it humanizes them and makes them significantly more relatable. Humans follow people they aspire to be, or who they feel reflects how they see the world. Pretending to have all the answers, or that we don't get upset or hurt or have all the same emotions as our employees, creates a barrier to connection and a lack of trust. So those are the final comments that I'm going to make. I'd like to open it up for questions. If anybody has questions, and it does not even have to be about today's topic, but if you have any questions, those on Facebook, YouTube, start typing your questions. And if you're on the phone lines, come unmuted, and I'd be willing to answer any questions. Any questions? All right, I'm going to close it down and shut it off and let y'all get back to it. Thank you guys for listening. Please share this this recording as well, and let people know about it on the phone lines. Also, share it on Facebook as well. Thank you, and God bless you.